Hello and welcome back to Parley, my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. And this one is from CMeister. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's some Parley experiments. I was wondering, CMeister says, if you could try something new with this Parley video. Topic could be anything you like, but I want to see some experiments. Could you add more visual interest / cues into the video? Is there a way to incorporate more audience feedback / interaction with this video, which could lead to a video follow-up? I'm happy to request some specific follow-up next month if that helps. Think of this video as a hashtag experiment or hashtag free-for-all 3 exclamation points. 3 exclamation points indeed, what a fun prompt. Here's my plan for this video. Yes, I have a little list of things that we could maybe add or like further in Parley. And one of those things could be more structure or what you're describing like cues. So what I'm going to do is structure the video like that. We're going to talk about all those things. You have plenty of questions in this, so I don't think we need to add a topic. I'll just talk about that stuff. There will also be some discussion of how Parley works in this video, because there actually isn't currently a modern like Parley tutorial, if you like. And of course, some of those things will be, you can do this. It's not currently a formal system, but like go for it. So I think that will be plenty to fill a video. Let's see how it goes. The very first thing is this idea that you could structure the parts of Parley more formally, I guess. There could be more of a transition between them, a little bit more like a scripted video essay that I just put together as best as I can on the fly. Now, currently Parley is in this liminal space where I'm not trying to brag. This is just something I think is true about Parley. I think the way I do these is definitely more scripted. They're not scripted at all, but like it feels more scripted than most podcasts. In other words, while there are some snafus or there's a moment where I don't speak right through the sentence, I personally feel that these are more condensed than most podcast content. That is literally just people talking, like that is literally a podcast. There are definitely things that are sold as podcasts that this is story time, and so those are definitely more scripted, right? My point is that this is compressed. It's a little bit more in the direction of I try to do a video essay on your topic off the cuff, rather than I just chat about the thing that you brought up, you know? And I can do either. I mean, they're both available. But I think a reasonable thing to think is, what if you structured it a little more like a video essay? The way I record, and again, we're going to get into the structure of how I make these a little in this video, I can just pause time and, like, from your perspective, teleport around. At any given moment with very little effort, I can just pause the video and, like, do something and then, you know, start it back up again. So as we go through this Parley, I'm going to try to structure it in order of like most to least feasible additions to Parley, basically, and answer your questions as I go. And as I do that, I will provide these little topic breaks, like a fade to black, and then, you know, the next topic will come up on the screen. Let's just begin that now. So we just did this one, the sort of breaking it up with cues or more formalized structure. We could do that, and that might look something like this. Let's go to the next section. Probably the next most straightforward thing I can think of would be adding tags to the Parley interface. So this would mean that you could add a little hashtag experiment to the Parley to, I don't know, turn on those fade to black transitions, for example. You could say, if you wanted those, hashtag fade to black. You could just say in plain English, I'm interested in it being a more formal video essay. Would you try doing that again? That took me, you know, maybe 15 seconds. So with my interface, where that doesn't have to be done using editing software, and I can just kind of do it live, much more like a theater performance where the curtains close and then come back up, rather than needing to like go into editing software. I don't have editing software installed on my computer. My videos don't go through an editor. So that type of very small production value increase to help bookend information or like keep a 45-minute involved discussion about abstract concepts within scope so that people can actually remember it is not that difficult to do. I'm not really uncomfortable with the idea that if people liked that, I might end up doing that a lot, or I wouldn't be showing you it right now. I absolutely, in this section, I do want to reserve the right to say, I don't know for sure that that's a good idea for me. Like, maybe it will be way more of a pain than I think it is. But I don't, I don't think it's such a big concern that we have to not try in many cases. In many ways, also, this question is coming at a good time because we already have some unusual parlay that came out recently. We're going to get to those a little bit in the next section as well. And also, too, because parlay is still relatively small. I've been in this kind of limbo period with videos on the Zandy Pants and Bootleg Builds channels for a while. And the result of that has been that the audience pool for parlay is artificially limited. We're not getting discoverability in the way that we will in the future. The Zandy Pants, Bootleg Builds, and Pantaloon Saloon channels, and then the Zandy Pants Twitch channel form a kind of funnel. That's the intention, that people will discover the Zandy Pants and maybe Bootleg Builds channels initially, and then if they like that stuff, they can get more and more of it, but about a less and less extremely specific topic, and more generally the vibe of the topic as they go down the funnel, if that makes sense. The Zandy Pants channel videos are pretty focused. It's a game design channel focused on build systems. Pretty specific topic, and then rather expected organized format of video, and then it gets more, it is that kind of topic, but we're not talking about explicitly game design in many cases. It's just implicitly similar to game design. This is hardly something that is totally irrelevant if you're thinking about game design video essays, but there's no discussion of video games in this video. Bootleg Builds is maybe in between that. Not everybody wants specific builds or is even interested in thinking about these specific games, but I am, and some people are, and so that channel's there. That funnel means that it's really those channels putting out videos that is where new parlay people come from. It is interesting to note that the view count of parlay videos at this moment in history for the Pantaloon Saloon channel here has been trending upward a little bit. But I personally think that that's because there hasn't been that many videos, and people from my other audiences are looking for stuff to watch. They probably would choose to spend their time on those videos instead if they have limited time, but currently I don't have other videos up, so they're giving these more of a shake. And by the way, that's cool of you, but I don't mean to starve you of videos to watch. There will be an unacceptably huge amount of stuff on these channels once everything is back up and running. They're arguably already close to just with parlay. But a lot of people use this as a podcast and watch a lot of this stuff. I would like you to be spoiled for choice, and I think it will be manageable if you like all three channels once they're all up and running anyway. The point is that does currently kind of limit the potential audience for parlay, which makes this a uniquely good time to experiment. Absolutely, if you listening right now, statistically maybe 15% of you have parlay, that core audience seems to listen to parlay a lot. I think most of you do anyway. This is a really good time to push the envelope a little bit. It would not take me much extra work to kind of rein it in if I feel like it's overwhelming. So yeah, that's really good. Definitely transitioning into the next section. One of the things that's helpful about talking about this now is that we did just have a few kind of weirdo experimental parlay, sort of out of necessity or some meta reasoning, but I'll just talk about what they were for a minute. So for example, a few parlay ago, Mr. Food and I, True Parlay Grandmaster Food, had finished their very long series of Invisible Wall parlay about the frontiers of game design and maybe what games are possible and maybe sensible or good to make, but just aren't for various reasons. And shall we explore that space a little bit and see if we can find something really special there? That was a very interesting series. It took over 2 years for us to do all of it, just because there were a lot of parlay. It didn't especially take longer to make a lot of them on their own, just that it is a big series. So being that this is one of my longest running patrons and they have a lot of parlay, and we did a ton of stuff kind of vaguely together as we did that series. Mr. Fruit recommended a lot of games over the course of that series, and I played a lot of them. I consumed some art with them, not really with them, but and then I responded to their essay about it. obviously we were kind of keen to talk about it and unwind a little bit, and we both were talking in a private message and said, hey, let's try doing a podcasty thing and just see what people think. It's not that tenable to just constantly have random audience members visually on camera with me while doing Parley, but I mean, it's not like that big of it, you know what I mean? Like, we could just try it. It's okay. This is the time to try it. So that Parley was insanely long, but I'm happy to do that. Thank you for your support, Mr. Food. On that note, we also have Pistol Whip's recent Parley. This really did, just by total coincidence, come at a good time. I believe I didn't skip there's just one Parley out of order, and we can talk about iPatch Notes' Parley too. That's actually still noteworthy. But Pistol Whip's Parley. This was on Milgram, which is a like music video multimedia project, sort of, kind of hard to describe. Go watch that Parley, it's cool. That's after this one, that is about the Purge March, which is a song from that music video project. There's this interesting situation with this one where I had this song on my phone with no context. I just thought it was cool sounding and a little weird in tone, but hadn't seen like the music video, if you want to call it that, a very short piece of abstract fiction that is attached to it, and also, you know, the subtitles. I speak, you know, modest Japanese, but definitely not enough to like understand exactly what's being said. As I say, or the early part of the video, I understand just enough Japanese to know there is something weird going on here, and like that's it. So it was wonderful. In many ways, I was at the perfect moment in reality to experience this terrifying and glorious rabbit hole. And the result was that this Parley is long as hell. I have the text of that Parley pulled up right now. It is super long. You know, in normal circumstances, I may have rejected or asked for this Parley to be 2 Parley, because it is so long that even if I read every single word nonstop, it might not have fit into like 40 to 45 minutes. And yeah, I do that now and again. You don't have to feel bad or, you know, distressed about that. It's not a problem to show me something incredibly cool and interesting, but then it's just slightly out of scope and we figure out what to do. Just as a simple example, it could always be that we agree that this is 2 Parley, and so I want you to be willing to let me split it up into 2 parts. Or before, Mr. Fruit has said to me that I'm gonna be a Parley patron for the next few months. Can I consume 2 of those to let this video be longer? And since I don't have any other system to handle such a situation, sure, you know, I've said in the past. But it would probably be good to have a system or solution for that. So in these next 2 sections, I'll talk about what those are. The point with this section is just that, yeah, on a basic level, you can add tags and expand the range or specificity of the thing you're doing with Parley by saying some brief thing, free for all. I figure I can do whatever I want with this one, you know, and then you said experimental. You can obviously just say those things. You know, I want this to be a like video essay call and response where you read my video essay and then respond to it, or I want you to feel free to pick and choose or skip around. You don't have to like go through all the text of my thing. You can obviously just say those things or make them as some kind of concentrated hashtag and try to establish that in the community. Feel free. Like, that seems like a cool idea, kind of harmless, good idea. But what is a little more advanced is offering these different versions of Parley that you submit. You know what I mean? So let's move on to that. 2-parters and long Parley. So the idea here is that you have some topic by which it meaningfully wants to be one single prompt. We'll get back to that in a minute, but it doesn't really fit into like 40 to 45 minutes. Now, I will absolutely be the first one to say I am not as good as it is possible to be at condensing Parley. Sometimes I have difficulty getting a Parley to be a reasonable length, and I would not blame the prompter. I mean, you just don't need to blame anyway. It's fine, obviously. But just to say, I think it is very possible to make that Parley within scope, but I just personally am having trouble doing it. It can be challenging to do that. I don't mean to brag again when I say I consider this a challenging activity. It's just fun. It's a stimulating activity. It's enjoyable to do, but it's not trivially easy. It's something that plays to my strengths, but also pushes my strengths as a person. And so while I do think it's a good fit, I don't like regret that or feel hung up on it. It is true that it's not trivial always to condense Parley into one thing. And a point of faith with Parley as a service is that you, as the person potentially commissioning Parley, need to have enough confidence that I will try to not make it like outside scope. I want to fit it into that space. And I hope I've demonstrated that with how I've acted with Parley that go way outside of scope. I want to do it. I want to find a solution where we can do it. So, you know, often enough, people buy the Parley tier, you know, they pay $9 a month, and they don't use a prompt every single month. So if somebody is doing that, and they write a really long Parley, and I know they've been a Parley patron for like a year or whatever, and they don't always use their slot, I'm not going to balk very much at just doing the longer project. I just want to make that clear before we talk about, well, but some of them, it might add to it a lot to make it a two-parter. First of all, sometimes they're like, I'm not really sure you could have easily made that Milgram, the Purge March Parley, the Pistol Whip one, that I was talking about. I'm not sure that could easily have been that much shorter. I'm not really accusing the Parley of not being brief. I actually think you divide it up into sections really nicely. That Parley is a really good example of one where that format made sense. It was nice the way it was. So it seems like that means it would be good to allow a system that regularly lets Parley be like that, basically. And we will be getting to that in the second half of this section. Two-parter or long Parley. The two-parter thing, this is a little bit more specific to your prompt, CMeister. So you said, is there a way to incorporate more audience feedback / interaction with this video, which could lead to a video follow-up? I'm happy to request some specific follow-up next month if that helps. It might. Let's see if we think of a specific thing by the end of the video. Obviously, you can all imagine pretty easily that a Parley person might want audience feedback. That this is a fairly big part of making videos on YouTube anyway, and kind of part of Pantaloon Saloon is that you get to like sort of very briefly run a YouTube channel a little bit as a sort of executive producer, if you want to think of it that way. Some people are using this service that way. I think that's cool. It seems kind of neat to let people open it up to the comments. It's fine. That sounds cool. I don't see why not. And obviously, currently, you don't need to do anything special to do this. You could just submit a Parley normally, and then next month submit a Parley saying, based on the feedback that I got or didn't get on that previous Parley and what you said, Zandy, I want you now to talk about this. You know, like, this, you could just do that, of course. I feel like that has been done here and there before a little bit. And I definitely wouldn't mind, or I think it's a cool idea to try pushing that more. So if you made a video where you specifically asked or begged the question, what do people think about this? They get time to respond. And then I include that in the next one where you say, I want you to follow up on this. Great. I would imagine this is a Parley where that will be true. Without you really explicitly asking, hey, audience, tell me this, I think it's pretty obvious people who currently pay for Parley are gonna have a say on, oh, the service that I pay will get no more expensive but have many more features. Like, I have a response. You know what I mean? Responses? It resolves? Okay, good. Magic the Gathering tutorial complete. That seems feasible. I would imagine that will happen for this Parley. So yeah, I mean, I would say just for now, definitely ask a follow-up if you have, unless everything I've said in this Parley is not of interest to you, which obviously that is completely fine. If you are interested in that, I would imagine there will be some comments or comments on the Discord that I know you're hearing, that I'm reading this prompt from, or that I will just have heard people talk about this. You know, the tea time streams on Friday is a common time people will ask, like talk shop Parley questions. Can I do this? Is this okay? Can I slightly modify this right now? Etc. And that is a place where I expect to hear about this Parley. I bet this Parley will get a modest amount of views because it's insular, right? It's kind of about the topic of this channel that not everybody knows. People discovering this video on public YouTube that don't know about this channel, on the surface level, people with their very specific, fact-focused way of thinking about the world, not a more generalist, universalizing, it's the principle of the thing way of thinking about the world. It's predictable that a general audience won't be that interested in this video. So I would imagine that it will seem to you on the surface like that means people didn't watch it or whatever. But I assure you, the interested parties probably did give it a chance up to around here. And so, yeah, there will likely be responses even if you don't see any. And it's usually pretty easy for me to remember that stuff. At the very least, I can try to intuit a little bit, like, well, nobody said anything to me, or this person tried this, or whatever. Because I often do parlay in a little chunk. I do like a few of them at once. It's often very easy to remember very recent parlay, but very hard to remember like long past parlay. So I may be able to simply weigh in on my own as well. Like there, again, in this case, there have been recent parlay that kind of did those things, whether that was intentional or not. So there you go. Let's try to make something more like a formal rule or policy here. I just want to say again that I would like to reserve the right to change that, and I hope that I've done some work to get you to treat that in good faith. That I wouldn't do this. It's not that efficient of a way to like make money, for example, if I didn't like it. So what I'm trying to do is make the service healthy. I'm not trying to find a way to make it more worth my time or something like it. That's already not, if you wanted that, this already isn't a good way to do that. So I just want there to be some kind of like, what can you expect as a guideline? Yeah, I mean, I think it's usually pretty intuitive that if you prepare a parlay and it takes around the amount of time that a parlay would take, it's going to take me a little bit longer. Like if most of the time, if you type it out, or it's not something menial. Like in the past, there have been parlay where somebody submitted a tier list on TierMaker that they created previously, or made a template, like they didn't fill out the tier list, but they set everything up and they said, do this tier list or respond to this tier list. You can imagine that took them a lot of time and effort. That doesn't mean it's going to take me way longer to respond necessarily, right? But for some of them, it's like, even if you just look at the amount of text, like I would just be surprised if you were able to write that prompt within 30 to 45 minutes, which means I'm not going to be able to do it within that amount of time. I think for me, that is the only real hard rule. I am going to reserve the right to say, I want this to be worth 2 parlay, or I'd like to ask you to break it up, or whatever it is. If you submit a parlay of that length, it's just not feasible otherwise. Now, to an extent, there's a part of me that wants to have a policy that's something like, you can do whatever you want, but I have to fit it into this block of time, and therefore you can react how you like, right? You could do something I think is less sensitive to people's interests, where you just read whatever parlay they submit and cut yourself off at 45 minutes, kind of lambasting their parlay. And the reason I don't like that solution is because while it seems convenient for me, you don't have a lot of control over where I cut it off. You know what I mean? And for me to do that in a way that's nice to you, I have to do a lot of lateral thinking about what way of limiting the scope of the parlay is actually good. Obviously, this ties a little bit back into the tags thing. If you've told me, oh, well, the important bit is this, and then I do that, but then run out of time, that's fine, sure. And again, I don't do these by the numbers. This is not a plug and chug part of my work. You can rely on me to try to intuit things like that. And I'm absolutely okay with redoing parlay now and again. Behind the scenes, I redo parlay a little too much currently. Like I need more of that time to not be redoing parlay, but it's just me. It's my decision. So I'm definitely okay with redoing them now and again. If I make a parlay and you say something that is meant to give me the idea of what part I can cut off, but then I cut off a different part you didn't intend, it is okay to tell me that, and I will try to honor that and do better in the future, if not just remake it if I am able to. But obviously there's a social contract to this service. It only really works as something that a small to medium audience that already knows me and the service kind of well do. If this was like a public business, it's obvious why that doesn't exist. Like that would not work. It would be fraught with problems with the social contract. Speaking with being fraught with problems with the social contract, it's the same section, but upon reflection, I thought that it was really more of a break. Long parlay. Yes, I had been previously separately, not to do with this prompt, considering offering the option to buy a bigger parlay. Basically, the idea is that for people who had an idea for a prompt, parlay naturally causing them to think of ideas that might sometimes be longer, you have the option to have me just make it without splitting it up or like doing anything weird to it and just let it be like 2.5 hours on purpose. But I need to make it cost more to do that. From a price perspective, I want you to understand that it probably needs to cost more than like double a normal parlay. So, for example, if parlay is $9 a month, I'm imagining that this long parlay would be $25 or something like that. It needs to be a length of time that means, parlay can often be fit within an hour, and this longer one is going to be double the length, but more than double the effort. I'm going to have to structure a thing more. I'm going to have to get a video file that is huge, uploaded and managed on my computer. If you've worked with video before, it's just not trivial to like double plus the length of a video. That's not just twice as much work like that. It is a different amount of work, even though I've eliminated one of the big choke points, which is the editing process. Obviously, also, now and again, I'm going to mess it up in some way. And when that happens, I either have to record the parlay again, which then takes more time if it's longer, or use the YouTube editor to chop out like an irrelevant or interruptive part of the parlay. Unfortunately, the place I live to record is not, and isn't for at least a year or two, going to be repeatedly really quiet. So a very small amount of parlay, I just have to do something to eliminate like a truck horn or something from outside. And so again, those things add up. I don't mean to be pedantic or like that's not a huge issue. But I just want to alert you that it definitely isn't feasible for me to like just make $18 from a double parlay. I'm basically losing money by allowing people to buy 2 parlay at once if I do it that way and combine them together. On that note, by the way, this would be something I would try to offer. I'm not planning to offer it as a subscription. Patreon allows you to offer a la carte options, if you want to call it whatever you want to call it, where the people can just pay a one-time thing and get a perk one time. So that's how it would be set up. A lot more like commissions from an artist. I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm so nice, look at me. But I do want to point out that compared to a commission from an artist, getting like a sort of casual but full video essay for $25 is ridiculously cheap. Like that's insanely cheap. The cheap part is that it ultimately I get some fiat as well, right? It gives me the freedom to sort of whatever it is I'm sort of done there. That definitely is worth less money, but I still think that's really fancy for what it is. And to go into a bit more detail, the kind of things you could do with long parlay would be like add candid game footage. Somebody has asked, hey, there's this game you and I play that I was going to do a parlay on. Could I do a long parlay and include a candid run of part of the game's roguelike mode in the video? Yeah, sure. I don't see why not. That would definitely be outside scope for a normal parlay. It requires manipulating camera angles much more. The mental load of fiddling with my setup, as much as I have a good setup for this, does still add up. And fitting in a meaningful chunk of a gameplay loop plus discussion, just already you're over time with a normal parlay. You know what I mean? Like 45 minutes. If we hang out for 45 minutes and we're going to have an analytical discussion plus play a complete part of a gameplay loop, it just doesn't take only 45 minutes. So I think that's the perfect case here. That's an obvious thing to want. Like it's very predictable. People would ask for that. And so this is a way to allow it. Yeah, I hope that seems reasonable to ask for some amount more money for it. And because it's a la carte or like a commission, I might close them sometimes if I have a lot of other work. But otherwise, I think it's pretty feasible. And I had been planning to discuss this with somebody who has asked for this unrelatedly, as I said. And we're planning to do it. I mean, hopefully you'll see one of these. I will make it clear what it is when you're seeing it. It will be the length of those other 2 videos, but not a special case. They will be doing a regular system where you can get that when you want it. And so you'll see that. So certainly if you post the follow-up to this, please watch that and tell me how it went, if it's been up by then. And if you get impatient because I take too long to make it, that's totally understandable. You've paid for an extra month of parlay, so just let me know and I would be happy to just do a response. You have paid for it, so I think that's reasonable. While I don't want to let people retcon parlay too much, or again, I don't know what to call it, they have been a parlay patron for a month, but they didn't submit a parlay then. Again, I'm just using that as a way to honor that you're not being disingenuous with the system. On the other hand, I cannot allow people to just say, hey, for the past year, there were 3 months like 9 months ago when I had parlay but didn't ask for one? Can I now ask you for four? I'm sorry, no. For the service to work, I have to let it be. You can ask for a prompt each month, but you don't just get to stock them forever. That it's just not feasible as a business model. But I try to honor the flexibility when that happens. So I'll still do that, but having the way to deliberately say, oh, I want this project, can I make it at this size? Seems good. And it gives me a way to unconditionally say yes if you submit a long prompt and just say it would need to be of this length. Again, you can see how this is reliant on me not being disingenuous with the service. I'm going to try to make it fit, and then if it doesn't. The good news is I have massive, crushing social anxiety. I would like nothing more than to never speak to anybody, and I don't want to say, hey, we have to make an adjustment to your parlay thing you asked. That gives me anxiety so deeply ingrained that I'm not sure it will ever be gone, despite how much I've put myself out there on the internet to make a job out of doing infinite jumping jacks to become the king of Q&A. So if I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years and I still feel anxious about that, I'm going to say I'm just going to feel anxious about that for the rest of time. So I don't want to ask you to adjust your parlay. I guess you're just going to have to take my word for that. Moving on. Visual interest. Yes. I will remind everybody that I said I was trying to order these in order of how feasible they seemed like they are. So this is the turn where it's not that feasible. Mostly, no, I don't think I can add more of that easily. It is very common that you folks make some kind of graphic or visual aid of your own. Even just including a relevant screenshot or even just a link to something that's relevant to the parlay is already something that happens in more parlay than not. People will add, they have a key image or like a game feature, like a piece of the game's design or one of the build screens for the game. Or something as simple as just a link to their big list of the prompt. Mr. Fruit linked all of the invisible wall parlay. So if you want to read like a 47-page dissertation on the invisible wall in game design, you can just click the description and read that. This is a public Google document that exists. Whenever people ask what my job is and I explain the parlay part, I just send them, this is true, I just send them that. And they go, and then that's the end of that conversation. So, you can do that, of course. And I mentioned earlier the thing where people have made like a tier list template or even filled out the tier list and said, can you respond to this? You adding visual elements and then I pop them up as part of the parlay is totally fine. Easy. I have an interface for that. That takes very little time. I just hit download on Discord and fly it into my software. And then with this sort of theater prop thing, basically within 30 seconds, I have a cardboard cutout that I can wheel out onto the stage during the parlay. Let's just see what's in there now. Of course, Amane, the character from the Purge March from the previous parlay, like that's not hard to do. I can easily swap that out. Teleport/time travel, like here's the image from the thumbnail for the eye patch notes parlay from a few parlay ago where Ilya is using Rule Breaker to stab the villain of Prisma Ilya in the chest. Delightful. It's easy to do that. It took 10 seconds. These things do add up, as I said in the fade to black sections thing, and we've been doing it for the whole parlay, but it's not a big deal. Like it isn't a big deal. I think that over the course of most parlay, the heaviest that would get is I maybe spend 2 or 3 additional minutes doing that. That's fine. So those types of visual interest go nuts, and legitimately it's okay to go a little more nuts, I guess. Obviously, if you just include like 10 graphics, that's a lot of extra faffing for me for like a debatable benefit for the parlay. And I'm going to derail discussion and try to include them because the way for me to feel more peace of mind when I finish a parlay is to try to include everything you included. So don't include images or the things like that if they're not relevant to the parlay, sure. But I mean, it's fine. And there have also been cases where it was easy to do something in between adding candid gameplay and adding a visual interest thing that I've done for normal parlay. For example, Vampbug for a little while. Vampbug was doing these parlay that were about Magic the Gathering decks, and it's really easy to just pull up like the Architect as the deck builder they were using, the Architect website, crop it a little bit, and then just have my face cam be in a corner. I'm not going to switch to that right this second, but that kind of thing. Once it's set up, again, taking maybe 2 or 3 minutes, it's not very difficult for me to just use that for the parlay. That's not like a burden, or I would not, charge extra for that. That's within scope enough that it is easy enough to do in a normal parlay. A tier list, I go on tier maker and crop myself into the corner. I've got a setup for that. That's fine. But like me making a graphic for one of the videos, no, it's really never in scope. I mean, one of the things is that this is one of my few gaps as a generalist in the world. I don't really have any skill that is a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I'm a person who profits on 7 and 8 out of 10 skills in a unusually wide variety of categories. This is one of the ones I do not have. I'm horrible at drawing or crafting images. I'm famously atrocious at thumbnails and just don't have a sense for what works. Even when I feel so sure that a thumbnail is a good idea, it just looks awful, like hilariously awful. I had a comment from, I think, Mr. Food, that I have to somehow put more and less effort into thumbnails, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Please just do something else. And that's my situation, right? I've optimized my career around not needing to do that. So I'm bad at making images, but to be fair, I think for many parlay, if you have 45 minutes to an hour to make the thing and you're going to make a graphic for it from scratch, it's going to have to be pretty quick. I'm sure there are people who could do that, not me, like that. And that's definitely not one of the offerings. I'm here to respond to the prompt that you submit on the spot. If there's like preparing things ahead of time, we're very quickly getting into the territory of it's like me making a full Zandy Pants video for $9, which is just not feasible. I'm sorry. I kind of wish that it was, but there's not enough time or effort, energy in my body to do that. So additional graphics or like visual elements beyond this like fade to black thing I've been doing, I'm gonna say no. It's an asterisk no, it's a no, but if you have an idea, tell me. But I include this intentionally toward the end of the video, hoping that people will hear that and go, well, but I wanted something like this, which kind of sounds closer to that thing you said was okay. Is that okay? Yeah, ask me, of course. I just hope you won't be upset if I say, for this thing, no. I tried really hard to not have to do that in my life. I also just, to be candid with you, I just hate it. I don't want to be editing video footage. I don't want to be editing images. I will do a lot to avoid that. I have done a lot to avoid that in my life. But I still want it to be a good thing. And I like doing things that are challenging to me as long as they're within scope. So that, I do want to say that a lot of the like things that you would use a visual aid for, like basic abstractions turned into a concrete, basic, improvised graphic, are things that I do kind of do a little. There's this thing that a lot of humanity, now that we're all making videos significantly more often, is starting to do, which I refer to as the camera theater phenomenon, where the frame of a landscape format webcam usually, well, there's space on each side, right? And so it's easy to use it as like places on a stage. And you'll see when I do parlay, I very often combined hand talking from my Italian American upbringing with, trying to create abstractions in the environment and sort of measure things out by using the visual space in front of you. And just the association that over here means this and over here means that is very useful. That's a very useful rhetorical technique that's nice to have around in casual conversation as well as obviously parlay. A lot of the time there is some abstraction that I need to get across, and I'll do that. If you watch parlay, I'm sure you know what I mean. I think I do this a lot. Maybe that's wrong, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Now, some kind of setup where I have like a tablet and like a digital blackboard, and I can just extremely quickly improvise like a visual representation of something, I could see that being on the edge of being a sensible idea for these streams. That's like just close enough that I could see maybe that would be like worth it often enough to have the setup and basically just have a drawing tablet on my desk forever that I will only really use for this and maybe the streams. Maybe I'll really like it and use it all the time in other videos. I don't know. Maybe that is fine and sensible. I would say if you want me to do that, if you're thinking, yeah, that sounds like a good fit, Okay, as you listen to Parley for the next few, think about what situations it would help. If you're confused as I'm doing a Parley for the next few that you listen to, focus on that moment for just a moment and think about if you feel like that would help. I'm not trying to be facetious. I don't know. It might. I'll try to do the same thing. As I'm doing Parley, would it help to put this abstraction into a very simple, concrete, improvised graphic? If you assume the person drawing the graphic has the worst drawing skills of all time, and it would only be something like, here are the pros for this thing, and here are the cons, and my handwriting is barely legible, and my handwriting is barely legible. Like, I just want to emphasize that. But I'm not trying to be facetious. I think it is possible that that's a good idea. I've considered doing that previously. I guess you take me at my word. This is my first take, and these are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. I just had that, right? You didn't suggest that. I had already thought of this a couple of months ago, last year, previously. So I'm open to that as an option. That would be the kind of thing I would imagine could fit. In general, I think maybe I should also say, just quickly, that it's like the fabricating of things before the Parley that I'm so opposed to and can eat up a lot of time. If it can happen during the Parley, I'm okay with a little bit of, can you really just do that on the spot? Yeah, I mean, that if I have any talents, that's one of the few that I have. That is the thing I'm good at when I do these. So I would be willing to try. That doesn't really bother me in the same way. Socially, I have a lot of control over the environment as well. Like, keep everything comfortable the way I want it to. Just as a side fact, I almost always turn off the heat when I do Parley when it's cold. It's pretty cold outside. It is a very active activity, thinking on your feet and having an in-depth, basically social encounter with someone for 45 minutes, but they're not there and you talk nonstop for 45 minutes is a significant expenditure of, bluntly, calories. So I want to be cooled off. It's the kind of thing where I'm allowed to keep myself comfortable. I would be a lot less happy in this situation if I wasn't in my room with the door closed with whatever climate control I please. Yeah. So anyway, I'm happy to try stuff like that. But I would say prepare a visual graphic beforehand. I'm going to say a pretty hard no on that. It would have to be something very specific where maybe you made it for me in some way, or maybe the game has an image editor or something like that. I don't know. What else we got? I think that mostly handles it. So yeah, if you wanted to do a follow-up on this, the things I suggested in order are the kind of fade to black title sections. And by the way, currently I'm doing them like this. And then there's like whatever thing, like I did the visual interest section. I can somewhat optimize that setup as well. For this Parley, your text for the Parley happened to be very short. And normally in Parley, I do this thing where while the person who submitted the Parley's text is being read, like while I'm reading that out, I try to put this title of their Parley up so that you know that I'm reading their words, that it's, instead of just saying quote and then unquote like 50 times per Parley, I try to just put this up when I'm reading some of their text or saying something that is essentially just explaining a thing about their words. It's not really my words. I try to do that. I conveniently pretty much didn't need to in this Parley, which meant I didn't need to make a scene that is, like blackout and then that text. But that would be very easy to do. It will take like a maximum of 10 minutes to set that up, make a little button on my Stream Deck, and then have it there in a convenient. I'm gonna have to shuffle a few things around, but it's fine. It really is fine. So if you wanted to do that, that's something I think is, again, pretty in scope. It would be easy to do those fade to black sections. What did you think? Personally, going into the Parley, I'm kind of two minds. People are really easily impressed by production value as they see it. People have a fetishization of effort. If something seems like it took a lot of effort, it expended a lot of time, effort, or resources. People respect it, which doesn't make any sense. That's not valuable. It doesn't sort of earn respect, real respect, that has real context and contents. Effort doesn't matter. Effects, results matter. They're not the only thing that matters, but I think it's weird that people give this primacy to effort. I know, therefore, as a creator who has that philosophy, that if I do the fade to black and transition thing, many people will like the videos better, but for no real reason. They'll just feel like, oh, it's like a nicer quality experience. Like, okay, but is it? But it is a little bit, right? Also, it helps you kind of divide out these abstract concepts. I mean, did it help you divide out these abstract concepts? I did the sections a little in this parlay and tried to provide a demo. So that could be one thing to respond to. That is indeed pretty easy. And I kind of do it for my other videos at times. If you wanted that, I'm not opposed to trying to do that for some more parlay. And in fact, if you're someone who's been posting parlay other than CMeister, feel free to say that you literally just want me to do one of these things for one of the parlay, the ones that are in scope. Okay, tags, tag thing, telling me your intent more. Obviously fine, people kind of already do. Oftentimes people will do it by, at the end of their parlay prompt, they say, here is this question I have. This is this key question. I'm just going to quickly read you some of the next parlay that is going to come out, the next prompt in the list. It's from Just Rusty. Thank you for being an example. It says roguelikes as blackjack. That's the thesis of the parlay. There's a paragraph explaining what you mean by that. I'm going to read it briefly, actually, which will confusingly have this heading up, but that too bad. While looking at what the last spell does with its build system, the last spell is a video game, I realized that almost all of the game's most interesting choices boil down to power now versus power later. In many ways, this is just blackjack. How close can I get to failure now without actually failing? Da-da-da-da-da. And then it ends with, is blackjack the default or ground state for roguelikes? And can you think of any other frameworks single-player buildy games build off of than that, like, power now versus power later thing? So you can see by framing it that way, the statement of intent is pretty clear. This is a fun thing about how we use language. I'm not really confused about what you want out of me from that parlay, despite you not explicitly saying, because you have a direct actionable question and the prompt is short. You want me to exposit about that idea and explore it for 45 minutes. Got it. You know, that's not confusing. And you don't need to preface your parlay if you don't want to. Part of the service is me doing the best I can with what you give me and making it convenient for people, as long as you uphold your part of the social contract and are willing to let me interpret if I have to, and assume that I'm trying, basically. But can you specify if you want to? Yeah, and you could specify a lot, really specifically, if you will. If you wanted to say something as specific as, you know, go through every single word and then respond as much as you can, literally just do this as a reading of my essay. That's okay if you want that. If you want it to be, oh, feel free to skip some sections and just make it the most interesting discussion, or I want you to explore this idea of mine, I want someone to critique this, etc. Whatever it is, or go down the rabbit hole of this thing, do this in this order. Pistol Whip, in your parlay, you literally said, I would like you to listen to the Purge March 3 more times in succession, once without the video, once with the video and no subtitles, and once with the video and subtitles. Okay, then that's exactly what I'll do, you know. Very nice. And I chose to do those during the video. I really liked that approach, having that as a prompt, and then I did it like more candidly in the video rather than briefly to prepare for parlay, just watching it, you know, listening to it 3 times and then with the additional information. So yeah, absolutely, we can do more of that. The 2-parter or long parlay. Again, this is something that is on the fringe of viability. I will try to introduce this in the next like month or so. And so you'll see an example of it, and I'll clearly make that apparent when that's happening. The 2-parter parlay is something people kind of do a little bit, and is just something I will try to make more explicit, or I'll bring it up when it could be relevant, or, you know, people might respond to this. I have had a habit recently, for no particular reason, but it basically is this, of saying something like, if you were to do more of this topic, I would be interested to talk about this too, or like, this isn't really that related to your parlay as you presented the prompt to me, but I think an interesting, significant tangent would be X, and therefore maybe you could respond to that if you wanted. I don't think anyone has done any of those yet, and that's completely fine. You know, it's not an ad. Most of you have had parlay for a long time. But if you wanted another topic, part of the service is meant to be that you can get parlay stuff without like having to think of a bunch of topics. You have interesting thoughts. I might be able to help you figure out where they are or which ones you're interested in. Even if it's as much as I say, I think this would be an interesting tangent, don't do it because your parlay didn't seem focused on it, and you think, that's not an interesting tangent. Why do you think that's an interesting tangent? Fantastic. I mean, hopefully I've helped you zone in on what you're actually interested in. That's completely fine. I don't care. Not a big deal. And of course, I will continue to do the thought bubbles that I have, prompts from me. These are 3 things from my personal notes that are literally just like, you could use these as prompts if you wanted. Just a couple of examples from this past month. I said, there isn't enough time in life to do everything an individual would want to do. There isn't even clearly room for the range of things most of us would want to do now. So how do we manage time for such things in a fruitful way? How much is too much to do at once or vaguely in the same parts of your life? And then there's another one that says responsible greed and playing to our outs in games and in life. These are just, you want to talk about that? You know what shandification is? I briefly explained what that is. Is that interesting to you? You can ask whatever prompt you want, but if you can't think of something you'd find interesting, I think I might be able to. And so I do offer those. Obviously, it's completely fine to do. I could imagine somebody do something like they pick one, it wasn't what they expected, and then they do a parlay response saying, wait, no, but I was much more interested in this. Like, do that instead. Okay, that's interesting. And if you see comments on Parley is nice because there's not a ton of comments. Most people who watch it are the core audience or already talk to me somewhere anyway, or are super duper random, like YouTube discoverability pickups. And so they're not going to respond. They're not going to comment. The few comments there are often at least quite on topic. And so that could be interesting. This one I'll just recommend. If you are interested in that, just keep an eye on that stuff or think about if you'd want to do a follow-up one. And we'll keep an eye on it. And then again, there'll be a long parlay coming up. Finally, more visual interest, kind of a hard no if it's prepared before the parlay and I'm just making graphic design for a parlay. That is well outside the scope and would just personally take me way too long. But if something like having the ability to add like some concrete elements, again, that tablet example I gave, sounds like it would be useful, just keep that in mind. Like, do you think it would be useful? That's something we could explore doing. I could at least try it. I'm absolutely happy to try. I know this was kind of an academic parlay, you said experimental. I felt like to honor what you're actually asking, this was a pretty down to earth, like maybe a little dry parlay. I don't know, was it? But I personally think it's interesting and it's fun to break down as someone doing this. Where else can we go? What else is it going to be? I did not conceive that people would write a 20 video dissertation using parlay. I did not plan that. That was not the idea I had. That was not me. Mr. Food came up with that, and I like that. That's cool. As long as it can be within scope and we have some kind of functioning social contract, just go comparatively nuts, right? Why not? So let me know what you thought. And yeah, do a follow-up to this. If you need to wait a few months or you want to pay for one more month and then not keep being a Parley patron, just message me telling me that's what you intend, and I'd be happy to just keep that in mind and remember that you want to do a delayed parlay. That's okay. So yeah, I think that's about it. Great. So folks, as kind of more than usual, I feel like I've plugged Parley a lot during this video. I don't really know how I'm supposed to do this topic without doing that, so sorry. If you do want to get Parley yourself, you could do that using a link in the description. Again, if you're interested in the big Parley thing, it's going to be like maybe a month or so before that's up as a commission thing that you can do. But you'll see an example of that before then. Looking forward to the follow-up, I guess, if you decide to do one of those. Sounds cool.